everybody. And in this chapter we're going to pick up with basic macroeconomic relationships, and this is going to be the last chapter of course module 2. So if we look here, we're going to look at the relationship between income and consumption and income and savings, non-income determinants of consumption and saving. And remember, in an economy you have the trade-off between what is consumed and what is saved. We are then going to look at what can shift investment demand, and finally our notion of the multiplier. So let's take a look here. So in economics, consumption and saving is the trade-off that we make, and it is determined by disposable income. Remember, when we looked at the various types of income in national accounts, I said disposable income was very important. The reason it's very important is the disposable income, or income available to someone to buy goods and services and everything else, that is what determines what's consumed and what's saved. And there's a direct relationship. The more income, the more consumption and saving. So we can make what's known as a consumption schedule, where we take into account and plot out our planned spending in our model. And our savings schedule is the following. Disposable income minus what is consumed is saved. It's pretty logical. Anything that isn't consumed is saved, and dissavings can occur. It is possible to have negative savings. And how do we do that? We do that via means such as borrowing. Credit cards, loans, all of that stuff allow us to actually spend more than our disposable income. In that case, that would be considered a negative savings. So if we look here, we have two lines, our consumption and our disposable income. And the difference between the disposable income, which is the blue line, and the consumption, the difference between the disposable income, which is the red line, and the blue line, which is consumption, is savings. So the gap between them, as you see with my highlighter, these are examples of saving. So in this case, savings was actually growing at as we approach the end of the 20 teens, and that is what we're actually looking at here. Now, if we look, we're going to look in this case at an example of a consumption and savings schedule. So we can look at various levels of GDP, what is consumed and what is saved. So remember, as GDP goes up, we're going to have both more consumption and savings. So in this fictional country, at a GDP of 370 billion, savings is actually negative here. When GDP grows to 450 billion, savings jumps to 15. And note, consumption is going up at all cases as well. Average propensity to consume is how much of your income you're consuming. Note, at level 1, it's 1.01 or 101%. That's why we have a negative savings. At level 2, it's 100%. That's why savings is 0. And at all other levels, it's under 100%, so there is some degree of savings. And if we look at average propensity to save, that's showing us how much of our disposable income is being saved. The marginals mean the change in, so every level, the change in consumption is 75%. Meaning of each new dollar brought in, 75% is consumed and 25% is saved. That's what we're looking at here. So it's entirely possible to have a negative level of savings, and this is something we have seen before as well in various countries. And that's what's known as a negative savings rate, and we'll go into what that can actually do shortly. But that is a consumption and savings schedule. If we plot it graphically, we're looking at the same thing here. Before the lines cross at this point, we have what's known as dissaving, or we're borrowing more than we're actually making. And then at any point above the intersection, we have some degree of savings. So that's what's plotted graphically here. So your average propensity to save and consume, These are pretty simple. The average propensity to consume is simply consumption divided by income, and the average propensity to save is simply savings divided by income. And they'll always sum total to 1. If we're consuming more than we're making, our average propensity to save will be negative. So no matter what we do, these two things will always sum total by rule to 1. They'll always sum total to 1. If we look here at this global perspective, there are some countries, this was as of 2018, that do indeed have a negative savings rate. Finland and Spain, for instance, they both were spending more than they were saving. The United States at points in time has had a negative savings rate as well. It currently does not. And after all of the shocks we've seen from COVID, we've actually seen savings rates tick up, which is a good thing for long-term stability. But generally, after shocks, so after bad recessions or anything like that, people become much more inclined to save. The marginal propensities here, that's how much of future or the next dollar you make, how much is going to be saved and consumed. So the example we just looked at was 75% and 25% respectively. And they're both, once again, going to sum total to 1. So if we look here, marginal propensity to consume and save, they're going to sum total to 1. Of this $20, 15 of it consumed, $5 saved. So of a new $20 coming into the economy, that would be what happens here. So what besides income can determine things such as consumption and saving? So wealth overall, so wealth is someone's overall, the amount of money they have, the amount of resources they have. So if people have more wealth, it's going to shift the consumption schedule up and savings down. You don't really need to save as much if you already have a lot of savings or a lot of wealth. So in recent years, major fluctuations in stock values have increased the importance of this effect. If you made a lot of money in the stock market, you're probably going to save less. If you lost a lot of money, you're probably going to have to save more. So we saw a reverse wealth effect during various stock crashes, such as the tech stock crash at the beginning of the 2000s, the stock market crash for 2008, so on and so forth. Debt levels, so if someone is in a lot of debt, they're probably going to have to save more to pay back the debt. Low levels of debt will generally increase consumption. Expectations similar to what we looked at with demand. If you think that the economy is going to do badly or well in the future, that's going to change how much you save or spend. And finally, interest rates. If interest rates are going down, you're probably not going to save very much because you're not going to get anything on your money, and it increases the incentive to consume and even borrow. Low interest rates make it attractive to borrow money. So that's the effect of interest. However, with household stuff, they're not really interest sensitive. Your bills are your bills regardless. So it's not a huge change of spending, but it does affect it. Other things that we can look at here, macroeconomic models focus on real GDP more than disposable income, and we'll look at that in a moment. So we can look at this not in a DI, but in a real GDP sense. And we can look at the difference between moving along one schedule or a change in the amount consumed or shifting it or a change in consumption. Similar to supply and demand, if the entire curve shifts, it's due to external factors. If we move simply along the curve, it's a function of income or GDP, whatever we're looking at. Generally, consumption and savings always shift in opposite directions unless we change taxes, and we'll look into this in a minute. So looking at this slide here, our real GDP, we're using real GDP instead of disposable income, and C0 is our original consumption, and it can either go down to consumption 2, less consumption, or up to consumption 1, more consumption. That would be from external factors, the ones we just touched upon, and same thing as savings. If consumption is going up, savings should be going down. And if consumption is going down, savings should be going up. The only thing that would not cause this is if we change taxes. The reason being, if we raise taxes on everybody, they're going to have less money, period, so less savings and less consumption. And if we cut taxes, they'll have more money, so you should get both more savings and more consumption. So the only thing that causes them not to move opposite each other is a change in taxes. Now, as for interest rates, remember we looked at supply and demand. The cost of investment is interest. So the more expensive it becomes, the higher the interest rates become. It's going to make it more expensive to borrow money or invest your own funds. So what do we mean by this? We're going to look at a slide next, which shows us it plotted graphically. But no matter what you do to fund an investment, your money isn't free. So if you borrow money, you go to a bank, obviously there's an interest rate. And if rates are going up like they are right now, the reason they're doing that, and we will touch more upon this later when we cover monetary policy, the reason the Fed is doing that is to try to slow down the economy. By raising interest rates, it makes it less attractive to invest, because your investment not only has to be successful, but it has to pay you more than the increase in interest rates. Investments aren't always a surefire thing. They can fail. So as a consequence, as interest rates go up, investment demand goes down. It also becomes more expensive to invest when there's high interest rates. If you have to go to a bank and borrow money, it costs more. And if you use your own funds, well, those aren't free either. When we use our own funds, we have to take into account what we would have made by simply putting them in the bank, or the interest we would get on them. Our money could make us money if we didn't use it, so it's not free to even use our own money. So if we look at the following slide here, as interest rates are going down, investment is going up. They're inversely related. At an interest rate of 16%, there really aren't any investments that are going to return more than that. As it goes down, our investment is going up. So they're inversely related. Lower interest rates, investment becomes much more attractive. And by investment, we mean things like buying capital goods, inventing new products, expanding our business. That's what we mean by investment. Not buying stocks or bonds. Remember, that's financial investment. When we talk about investment in this class, we're referring to economic investment. So what can actually shift overall demand for investment? Once again, these are external factors. So things such as changes in costs, so acquiring, maintaining, and operating capital goods. If they're becoming more costly, you'll have less investment. If they're becoming cheaper, you'll have more. Taxes are pretty straightforward. If taxes go up, investment is going to go down. There's going to be less money available to everybody. If taxes go down, you'll have more investment. Technological change generally drives greater investment. The more technologies we have, the more we're going to invest in them when businesses realize what they can do and how they can help them. So technological change drives more investment. Stock of capital goods on hand. If you have a lot of capital goods already you're not using, you're going to drop your investment. You don't need to get more. If you need capital goods, you're going to increase your investment. Remember, inventory changes are a form of investment as well. If we want to expand our business by stockpiling more inventory to grow, that's considered an increase in investment. If we are selling off inventory because we are shrinking or the economy is doing poorly or anything like that, that is a decrease in investment. And expectations, once again, where do you see the economy going? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Obviously, that would affect investment as well. So that would cause what we're looking at in this slide right here, which is a curve shift overall of the investment curve. So moving along the curve is simply a function of interest rates. If the entire curve moves, it is a function, once again, of one of those external factors. As for investment itself, we consider investment a very unstable type of spending. It's much more volatile than GDP because expectations quickly and easily change. So depending on what the economic outlook is going to greatly affect the amount of investment you make. Also, capital goods themselves are pretty durable. So we generally can postpone spending. If you're in a recession or in a very poor economic times, you're probably not going to build a new headquarters or buy all new vehicles or all new factory equipment. You'll probably fix the ones you have. So it's unpredictable and can cause periods of large amounts of purchases and then long time where very little capital good purchases. Finally, innovation is irregular, so technology comes in waves. And depending on when technologies come out, that's going to greatly affect the amount of investing in them as well. Once they become mature and everybody has them, businesses by all means still buy new computers, but they're not buying them like they were in the 1990s when they bought them for the first time. They'll replace computers here and there as they need. As for profits, profits once again are variable depending on your business cycle. And if you're doing really well, you're probably going to invest a lot of it. If you had a really bad year, you might invest none. So it's going to greatly change investment as well. So what we have is known as the multiplier effect, and that's going to be the last thing we touch upon in this chapter. So the multiplier effect is the following. When we change spending in some degree, it's going to change real GDP more than the change in spending. So if we increase business investment, let's say by $1 billion, it's going to have more than $1 billion change in GDP. And our multiplier is found by what is the overall change in GDP divided by the change in spending. And that's the formula on the previous slide. And once again, the formulas that you would need on the homeworks and the tests, they're all built into these slides. So if we look here, we have a multiplier of 4. So in this case, we have an increase in investment of $5. $5. And with a multiplier of 4, it's going to cause GDP to grow by 20 overall. Change in income of $20. 15 of it will be consumed, 5 of it will be saved. So if we look here, how does this actually work? Your multiplier and your marginal propensity to consume are directly related. So to find your multiplier, it's 1 minus your marginal propensity to consume. That's actually going to give you your multiplier. That's going to give you your multiplier. 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume, that'll be your multiplier. So the multiplier and the marginal propensity to save are inversely related. If we have a large MPS, it's going to result in smaller increases in spending. So the more that's spent is going to give you a more powerful multiplier effect. So at an MPC of 0.9, you have a multiplier of 10. At an MPC of 0.75, you have a multiplier of 4, or the one we just looked at, 0.52, so on and so forth. So the more you consume in an economy, the more powerful that multiplier effect. So spending is actually good in a growth sense. However, having a complete negative savings rate where you spend all of the money coming in and no one saves anything, that is not necessarily good either. But in a growth sense, the more that is spent is a positive thing for economic growth, that multiplier. However, in real life, the multiplier is less powerful than it is on paper. One thing you're going to notice about the remaining chapters to come in this class is that what works great on paper works a lot less good in practice. So what we've seen from real data, the actual multiplier is a lot lower than our model assumes. There are some reasons for this. Number one, consumers buy imported products as well as domestic ones, and that causes money to leak out of our economy into others. Households pay taxes. We weren't taking taxes into account there. So once taxes get taken into account, it greatly reduces the amount of money that'll multiply back. Inflation exists, so we're going to cover inflation more, but we've already touched upon it. And remember, inflation is money losing value over time, so that can dampen out the multiplier. So actual multipliers may be a fraction of what you calculate on paper, or may even be 0. So in reality, it works a lot less good than in theory. And finally, our last slide here, an example of the multiplier. So the multiplier can lead to a domino effect, and we've seen this before with recessions. So if one person in town decides not to buy a product, it can create a ripple effect of people following suit and not spending, and now, since no one's buying, there is no consumption, and the entire town would get an economic downturn. And a lot of times we do see this when one sector of an economy starts doing poorly. Other sectors may follow suit. People may be afraid to buy more stuff. They see that, oh, it looks like we might be going into a recession or the economy is doing poorly. Let me stop spending now. And then we see entire unrelated sectors all start to slow down as well. So economies are very interconnected. And when we change consumption in one part, it can have a ripple effect throughout the rest. And that is what I will leave you on in this chapter. And this is going to once again bring us to the end of module number 2 of the course.